It is said that during the early Great Crusade, the Imperium was like a newborn, raw and struggling amidst the chaos of its birth. Alliances were newly formed, untested, and the domains under its control were often unstable and disloyal. Rebellions and conspiracies were frequent, quickly quashed by the Imperium, but some insurrections called for more than suppression. They demanded severe retribution. One such rebellion arose in Vhnori, a Terran city enclave that had once been part of the Pan-Pacific Empire. Carved into the walls of a deep crevasse, Vhnori had been among the last strongholds of Navham to fall. Its structures sprawled across the plains and down into the depths of the earth. The city was bathed in a perpetual twilight, with the light of both sun and hive only faintly illuminating the deepest levels. The people of Vhnori had never embraced imperial rule, but after Doom's defeat they had submitted in grim silence. That changed with the arrival of the Crimson Walkers. The Crimson Walkers were a sinister cabal of psychers, gene splicers and warlords, remnants of the last tyrants of the Age of Strife. In his quest to unify Terra, the Emperor had toppled many such rulers. Their names and deeds were remembered as dark legends. They were the monarchs of old night, tyrants who had enslaved billions through fear, lies, and forbidden knowledge. Atrocities were their legacy, marked by gene lore and the dark arts, serving as a grim reminder of the Emperor's gift of freedom to humanity. Yet, shadows of old night persisted. Fanatical followers, cunning heirs, and fugitive warlords. Many were hunted down over the years, but some survived. These survivors formed alliances, driven by a burning desire to reclaim what the Emperor had taken. Vhnori became the heart of their resurgence. In the Canyon City, the Crimson Walkers gathered followers and slaves, constructing a new fortress of horror. Ancient nightmares resurfaced, flesh forges, blood harvests, and the walking dead. As the Crimson Walkers seized power, the people of Vhnori followed them, not out of fear, but as if they were loyal beasts returning to a familiar master. Those who resisted were consumed by the Crimson Walkers' dark rituals. For a brief moment it seemed as if they might drag part of Terra back into the nightmare of the past. Upon hearing of this reborn threat, the Emperor reportedly uttered 3 words: "Send the 8." The 8th Legion, known for their ruthlessness, did not respond immediately. A force of just over 500 warriors departed the Sol system. Despite their small numbers, they were undeterred. They understood the mission and the fate that awaited them. The assault began with a fiery bombardment from the night sky. Turbo lasers and inferno shells transformed the darkness into blazing daylight, targeting the outskirts of Vhnori. For 6 hours, the bombardment raged. When it ended, a kilometer-wide ring of fused metal and earth surrounded the city, leaving the inhabitants in a state of fearful anticipation. Then dawn came, or so it seemed. Black clouds spread across the sky, blocking out the light. A heavy, chemical-laden rain began to fall. People grew dizzy, their senses heightened, perceiving every sound and movement around them with exaggerated clarity. The rain continued for a day, blending night into day, and the city was engulfed in darkness, where shadows whispered and shapes half-seen lurked. From this darkness, the 8th Legion emerged. The ships above had illuminated the night with fire before deploying the Legion, who fell silently in their midnight dark armor towards the crevasse. Once far from the light above, they activated their jump packs to halt their descent. In the pitch black beneath the city, they clung to the rock walls like silent predators, waiting for true night. When the moment came, they infiltrated the lower levels of the hanging city, slaughtering any who crossed their path and planting charges to send buildings plummeting into the abyss. Screams echoed up the canyon, spreading terror among the surface population. Panic ensued, with some collapsing in fear and others fleeing the chaos. The Crimson Walkers retaliated with an army of grotesque creations, stitchmen skittering on multiple human hands, mind-broken witch slaves and psyker thralls emitting the static screech of the warp. Vhnori's defenders fought back with gunfire and warp fire, but the 8th Legion pressed on, navigating the wreckage with jump packs and wielding lightning-sheathed claws. Men fought with the voices of the dead, their spirits pushing out recorded sounds of suffering and hope. When the battle reached the chemical lake on the canyon's upper lip, it ignited, roaring through the chasms and incinerating those it touched, and it was then the drop pods fell from the sky. The Night Lord's reinforcements converged on the chasm, bringing an end to all they found. Witnesses described a night of armored figures engulfed in flames, advancing inexorably through the burning city, accompanied by a chorus of screams from every direction. Despite their horrors, the Crimson Walkers were few, fragmented and desperate. They attempted to escape the doomed city, but none succeeded. Their abominable bodyguards were cut down, and each rebel faced the towering, blank-faced figures of the 8th Legion, knowing Imperial justice had come. Those who reached the city's edge found themselves hunted by 8th Legion seeker squads. It is said the Legion allowed many to flee, only to hunt them down at the artificial night's edge, inflicting terror before dragging them back as mutilated captives. With Vhnori ablaze, the 8th performed their final duty. The surviving Crimson Walkers were thrown into the chasm, and charges were detonated along the cliff edge, severing lines and sending buildings crashing into the abyss. The screams of the 10 million who had sheltered from the fighting in the cliff-bound buildings reached up to the sky as they followed the Crimson Walkers into the black depths of the earth. The Night Lords left the decimated city before dawn came again. It is said that the events at Velekshar, though scarcely mentioned in the annals of the Legions Astartes, were pivotal in their own right. Velekshar itself was an unremarkable system, a collection of lifeless gas giants and airless planets orbiting a bloated red star. Its significance lay in its proximity to the orc-infested Kaldrak cluster and its position along relatively stable warp routes. As the Crusade forces moved to cleanse the Kaldrak cluster, many fleets, including the 7,500 and 21st Castigation Fleet under Balthasar Sul of the Night Lord's 19th chapter, passed through Velekshar. Lord Commander Eidolon of the Emperor's Children had ordered a small detachment of iron warriors led by warsmith Vosh to join Sul's fleet en route to the war zone. Relations between the two legions were strained. Sul viewed the Iron Warriors with contempt, and Vosh reciprocated with barely concealed disdain. The combined fleet had just emerged from the warp and was preparing for the next jump when their astropaths sensed a massive object displacing from the warp. Sul immediately ordered preparations to return to the warp, but before the ships could react, a vast space hulk tore into reality above them. The Night Lord's fleet scattered as the monstrous construct, trailing fire and wounded reality, released a horde of crude orc ships from its flanks. Within moments, the Imperial fleet was under attack. The Iron Warriors were slower to respond, their ships already burning and tumbling in the space hulk's wake. As they regrouped and returned fire, they found themselves abandoned. Sul had ordered the Night Lords to withdraw, unwilling to engage in what he deemed an unwinnable battle. Having faced the orcs at Godrinan and Musatara, Sul knew the futility of fighting such a vast horde with their limited forces. As the Night Lords slipped deeper into the system, the Iron Warriors prepared for a desperate defense. Orc boarding pods and assault boats soon breached their ships, flooding the decks with greenskins. The Iron Warriors fought back with brutal efficiency, channeling the invaders into kill zones that soon overflowed with corpses. Despite their efforts, the Orcs' numbers were overwhelming. One by one, the Iron Warriors' ships fell, cursing the Night Lords as cowards. Meanwhile, Sul's fleet had not fled far. They hid in the shadows of outer planets and moons, launching a series of swift and brutal raids. Appearing suddenly, they fired volleys of ordnance at the Orcs before vanishing back into the darkness. Their attacks sowed confusion among the Orcs, cutting off their support and isolating elements of their fleet. The Night Lords also mounted a daring raid on the space hulk itself. Boarding torpedoes delivered a full Terra cadre into the hulk's heart. Normally, these squads would have sown fear and chaos, but the Orcs were impervious to such tactics. Instead, the Night Lords aimed to create anarchy. By targeting key leaders and instigating infighting, they plunged the Orc forces into disarray. For weeks they stalked the hulk's margins, ambushing and killing Orcs, leading them into traps and collapsing chambers on their heads. The Orcs, unable to consolidate their presence, were kept in constant turmoil. The Night Lord's strategy prevented the Orcs from fortifying the system or launching a cohesive counterattack. Their efforts created a prolonged state of chaos, buying time for reinforcements to arrive. For 5 months, the tensions between the Orc factions grew, preventing a new leader arising or an effort to hunt down the raiders. Eventually, a much larger force of Ultramarines and Imperial fists, supported by several Imperial army corps, entered the system. The Night Lords recovered their surviving brothers and withdrew. Sul later claimed that his strategy had been flawless. By preventing the Orcs from establishing a foothold in Velekshar, he had saved the Imperium significant time and resources. The Iron Warriors had simply been acceptable collateral damage. Though some accuse Sul of cowardice, it is likely that his motivations were truly as he described. The result was undeniable. Velekshar was reclaimed at a much lower cost, and the Crusade retained its vital staging point for the cleansing of the Kaldrak star cluster. It is said that the campaign known as the Winnowing is one that few would wish to remember, marked as it was by the depths of brutality. Among the numerous campaigns prosecuted by the Night Lords in the later decades of the Great Crusade, the Winnowing stands out. By then, voices calling for the Emperor and the War Council to shackle Curze and his legion were growing louder. The Night Lords seemed to respond by becoming even more ruthless and unyielding, as if daring the inevitable censure. The Aeschylrai Systems became the stage for this bloody demonstration. The Aeschylrai Systems were a cluster of populous worlds near the galactic core. Governed by a union of warrior mystics and technomancers, the Aeschylrai's realm was likely a remnant of a once great empire that had survived the age of strife. Their technological sophistication was matched by a deep-seated resistance to unification with Terra, making them a valuable prize. The task of bringing them to compliance initially fell to Nezakonia Kale, war mistress of the Varisian and commander of the combined 856th Subjugation Fleet. Kale, a commander of great skill, began her campaign by securing Tenora, a system on the edge of the Aeschylrai territory. With Tenora's sparsely inhabited planets under control, Kale aimed to use it as a linchpin for assaults deeper into the Aeschylrai systems. Kale's initial progress was promising. The Aeschylrai, while sophisticated and tenacious, seemed manageable. Kale estimated a decade would suffice to bring the cluster to compliance. However, insurgency soon took root. On worlds already brought to compliance, iterators were murdered, officials were kidnapped and returned in mutilated pieces, storage depots were bombed, and factories were sabotaged. Though these setbacks slowed the advance, Kale, a seasoned commander, reported the situation to the War Council, requesting no aid and simply stating that the compliance of the Aeschylrai systems would take longer than expected. Without summons or warning, the Night Lords arrived. 2 full war fleets under the command of Captain Varjahan. Descending first on Tenora and then on every world that had fallen to compliance, they came from the night sky. They brushed aside the entreaties and questions of Imperial officers and set to work across the planet's surfaces. From every house, hab, and shack, they took captives, killing those who resisted. These captives were subjected to death pits, pyres, and flensing frames. Severed heads lined the roads, and bloody skins flapped from gateposts, filling the air with the stench of burning flesh. Throughout the screams of the dying and the soon-to-be dying, the Night Lords remained silent. When their grim work was done, they departed as swiftly as they had come, leaving survivors to witness the horrifying cost of resistance. Despite pleas for restraint, conferences, or submission from Kael and her generals, the Night Lords pressed on to the true battlefront. Their first assault was a torrent of noise and images that overwhelmed the Aeschylrai communication systems. Data wraiths and subversion djinn, created by the Legion's bonded tech priests, infiltrated the communication networks. The sounds and visions of the punished worlds screamed from every screen and speaker. On each new world, fear spread through whispers, glances, and sobs in the deep hours of the night. When a world was ripe with terror, the Night Lords struck with overwhelming force, targeting the most densely populated and ill-defended cities. Hundreds of midnight-clad warriors descended, not to command centers or fortresses, but to the heart of civilian populations. In a single night, they would annihilate a city and broadcast its screams across the planet with a simple message: "We have come for you." It took the winnowing of 4 planets before the Aeschylrai surrendered. Even then, the Night Lords lingered, moving from world to world, annihilating a city on each to ensure that all would know the fate awaiting any who rebelled against their new masters. Their gruesome task complete, the warriors of the 8th Legion vanished back into the darkness between the stars.